So first of all, when we talk about curing olives, why do we actually need to cure them? Well, if you've ever tasted an olive straight off a tree, you'll know why they need to be cured. You've got to try it just once in your life and you'll know they're absolutely revolting, incredibly bitter. They really are. So curing refers to getting that bitterness out of that olive to make it palatable. The stuff that's in the olive that is the bitter component is called oleopurine, I think, something like that. Interestingly, birds can't taste that. So birds will attack olive trees once the olives start to turn red or purple, and they'll eat them. They can't taste it. But as humans, we do taste it. So curing means ridding that olive of that intense by either removing it using water, because water will eventually leach out all of that bitterness, or you can speed up the process using brine. There is a third method too, which did originate in certain areas in Italy, and it's using caustic soda or a lye solution, L-Y-E it's spelled. And that's a very, very quick way of doing it. You're dipping this stuff in a solution of caustic soda, but afterwards you need to rinse off that caustic soda. So there's a lot of work at the other end taking that out. I've never used that method. I know there are people in the audience that have, and they might sort of run it by us at the end if you're interested in hearing how it's done. But I'd bet my bottom dollar 90% of olives that you're buying from the supermarket will have been de-bittered or cured in that caustic soda solution. So we're going to look a little bit differently. Just a quick look at the shop-bought olives as well. I'm always interested to see what are the ingredients. So this is a typical brand of Kalamata olives, pitted. And I don't know if you can see that very well, but the ingredient says olives are blah, 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 blah. But it also says colour. And that goes for the black Spanish ones as well. There's colour added. And even the Sicilian green olives, there's colour added. Because some of the curing process does take out some of the colour. And so manufacturers put in artificial colours to make your olives look more appealing. Interestingly, these Sicilian green olives, when they first came out on the market, they were almost a fluorescent green. And I just knew this was not natural. Olives do not cure this way. They turn into what we call an olive colour rather than a bright green colour. They were pumping a lot of colour back into it. Now they still are, but not nearly as much as what had been before. So let's try and do our olives without, in a natural sense, rather than having to artificially do things with them. All right, now just a note, if you've got an olive tree, you're wondering when are they ready to pick? So olives flower, the trees flower around about October. You start to see fruit around about December, very small. It starts to get larger around about, February, March, April. You think, oh, can I start picking these olives? A general rule of thumb is that if any of the olives on the tree have started to turn purple, then the green ones are ready to pick in order to process. So you're looking for some of them starting to turn purple, and then you can pick the green ones. If you want to process your olives as straight black ones, you've got to wait till they've turned black on the tree and find birds for them. Remember, they'll get to them at this point. All olives go from green to black. It was interesting when I was at the nursery, people would come in and they'd see olive tree olives on it, but they'd see the little tag, the label, it always shows green olives. And they're saying, yeah, no, we want black olives. Sorry, you will.
Maybe later if you're outside,
Now, I might just have to go back to people if I could. Or Teresa, if you're there, can you please mute yourself? So it's a little bit of a distraction there. Sorry, Teresa, could you just please mute yourself down the bottom? Thanks. Okay, so just say you've picked olives or you've been given olives and there's a whole range of colours. The first thing you really do need to do is start to sort them out. Now I'm going to show a video here. Let's see, hopefully it works for us. Doesn't want to work for us. So imagine you've got a bowl like this. We process them all a little bit differently, whether they're straight green or green starting to turn black or completely black. So it's a little bit of sorting that has to happen first of all for best effect. And that I've done that there. I also sorted out any that looked obviously bruised and got rid of them. So I've got green, I've got what I call semi-coloured, and then I've got completely black. Do that first if you've been given olives from a tree. Other things that you might need, well, you definitely will need salt, and I'm going to specify non-iodized salt. You can buy it as just sea salt, or sometimes it's sold as kosher salt. It's just salt with nothing else added to it. The reason being is that the curing process using salt is a fermentation process, and fermented foods will be stopped in their tracks, I suppose, by using things like iodine in your salt solution. So look out for salt that's non-iodized, preferably. Please don't use Himalayan pink salt. You're going to be going through a lot of salt. That's going to get a very expensive process for you. So definitely you'll need salt. For some of the processes, you'll need some white vinegar. It can be just cheap white stuff. You'll also need some lemons. Other things you'll need, olive oil. Now you can go for cheap olive oil for one of the, when we put oil over the olives, and I'll show you, or you can use a more expensive olive oil if you're dressing your olives to eat. We're going to need jars, and I'm going to talk about the jars a little bit more, but if you've ever done any food preserving, you know that we never use plastic jars in general, plastic lids in general for food preserving, because you can't get a vacuum seal. But when we're talking about olives, there's no vacuum sealing involved here, so plastic lids are okay. So start collecting your jars. To help prevent the lids of those jars becoming rusty, a bit of baking paper is really, really useful. And I'll show you in a sec how it's used. Other things that are handy tools, things you've probably already got in your kitchen, a paring knife, which is just a small knife, serrated if possible, makes it easy to actually pierce into an olive. A chopping board, either wooden or plastic, not a glass one, because when we start to split olives, as you'll see, we're going to be banging up and down on this chopping board. You don't want to break the glass. And when we go to split the olives, an empty beer stubby. Interesting little tool there, but you can usually find one or empty a beer stubby and keep the bottle. Let's look at the jars and the lids. So we've got to make sure our jars are nice and clean, first of all. Make sure your jars don't have any chips or nicks in the rim or any cracks in them as well. But you can use any sizes that you've got. If you've got a lot of olives, you're probably going to look for much larger jars if possible. If you're going to be giving away olives, I'd be going for smaller jars. So you can just give away, a little jar at a time rather than big, huge ones. It's the lids that are critical. So looking at that lid that's up the top there, it's obviously rusted. Do not use it. Discard it completely, and you either need to get a replacement lid or you won't be able to use that jar. So you're looking for lids that are intact. This is really important because when we're keeping olives in jars, those olives are sitting in a salt solution. That salt solution may well be reaching that lid. And you can imagine if the olives are sitting in your jars for 6 to 12 months, those lids are going to get quite rusty. So this is where the little square of baking paper comes in. And I'll show you that in a video. Other things that you might use, and this is more for dressing your olives rather than adding to jars. So once the olives are cured and ready to eat, you have all these different flavourings that you can add to them. You know, go to your local supermarket and you'll see the ones that are already dressed. Check what they're using in those. I mean, things even like lemon zest, obviously chili, garlic, and so on. Okay, before I start looking at different techniques, I've got to show you how to make a brine solution, which is just a salt solution. Remember I said that bitter component is leached out just using regular changes of water, or it can be done using a brine solution. Now, I don't use a brine solution to soak my olives in and keep changing the brine. I just make up a brine solution when the olives go into a jar. Now, have a look at how it's made, because this is important. It's a 10% brine solution that we're usually working with. Any less than that, they're going to take longer to cure. Any stronger than that, you're going to end up with very, very salty olives at the end of the curing process. So 10% is your rough go-to there, which just means for every litre of water that you need to fill up your jars with your olives, 10% means 10% of that 1,000 mils is 100 grams of salt. In this case, I needed 870 mils of water to fill up my jars, so I had to weigh out 87 grams of salt, and I need to dissolve it in that water. Old timers, or if you ask older people how they work out their brine solution, this is what they do. They'll get the amount of water that they need. Here I'm just demonstrating using a jar, and they'll pop an egg in there. And then they'll add salt to that jar so that that egg starts to pop up out of the water. That is, they've increased the density of the water by adding salt. And once that egg has popped up out of the water to the size of, say, you're looking at about a 10-cent piece worth of egg sitting up the top there, that means that that water or that brine solution is strong enough to cure your olives. Now, there's a few issues with this method. If you've ever tasted or actually cracked open a fresh egg, for example, eggs become more and more stale as days go by because the air sac at one end gets larger and larger. So if I were to do this experiment with a fresh egg, as in freshly laid today, which I could because I've got chooks, compared to an egg that's been sitting there for 2 weeks, like you might get out of a supermarket, you're going to get very different results in terms of your brine solution. So I prefer having a much more scientific basis to how I measure out my salt, and I'll just put salt in water and make sure it's a 10% solution and not muck around with this egg business. A funny story with the egg business though, my brother-in-law many years ago, he thought he had to make up the salt solution and crack an egg in there and see if the egg floated. Obviously that's not going to work, and he's also contaminated his brine solution, but we all had a good laugh at his expense. Okay, let's get on to the olives themselves, and we're going to start with green olives. Now, the simplest way of curing green olives is just to do this, and this will work for straight green olives or the semi-coloured ones or black olives. You can use this method for any of them. So I'm just getting my nice clean jars. I'm stuffing the olives in as, really just jam pack them in there. And then I've measured out already before how much water I needed in that. And I make up that 10% solution. Dissolve that salt in that water. It might take a little while if the water's cool. And fill it up. This next part is really important. Over the top of that, I'm going to place a slice of lemon. Serves two purposes. It helps to keep the olives submerged, but it also adds a little bit of acidity to that solution. Over that, I've put in, you notice, a layer of olive oil. Then I'm putting that bit of baking paper over the top, and then the lid over the top there. So let me go back. I filled up the jar with olives. I filled it up with a brine solution. So I measured out how much water I was going to need, and I made up 10% salt in that water. Then over the top, I added that slice of lemon, and that helps to acidify the contents. Acid helps to keep bacteria at bay, and that's where the lemon comes in for this. Over the top of that, I've put a layer of olive oil, and the reason for that is I want to keep as much air out of that solution as well. And I filled it up pretty much to the top. Then the baking paper over the top of that, and that stops the liquid coming into contact with that metal lid, because that will rust over after a while, and then the metal lid over the top. That's a nice simple way of curing your olives. However, it's going to take, for large olives like that, up to 2 years to cure those olives. It takes quite a while. It takes quite a while because the leaching of that bitterness, because there's no points of entry into the olive itself, that's why it's with such large olives as well. You know, there's not much work at the start, but you are waiting a long time to get edible olives out of this. If you want to speed up the process, we need to have some sort of point at which the bitterness can be leached out. And so here we go, and we slit the olives instead. And here's where your paring knife is going to come in handy. So get your olives, which have been washed, and make 1 or 2 slits in that olive, and then put them in your jars. You can use this with green or semi-coloured or black olives. Again, we make up the brine solution, mix it all up. Now, the point of slitting them is that you're making entry points or exit points for the bitterness to come out of those olives themselves. Now, I'm filling it up. That lemon hasn't quite covered, so I'm just going to get another slice and jam it in there as well. Again, that olive oil over the top to help to stop air entry into those olives. So a good 2 or 3 ml covering, and then the baking paper and the lid. This should take at least 6 months off the curing process. So if the other one took up to 2 years, this might take 18 months. If the olives are smaller, it'll take less time. If they're semi-coloured or black olives, it'll take less time again, because they are already on the process, the ones that are coloured, of becoming riper or getting rid of that bitterness. Now, that was just filling up 1 jar at a time. Just say you've got to fill up a whole lot of jars with brine solution. How do you work it out? Now, here I'm going to probably insult the intelligence of a lot of you who are mathematically inclined, but that's not everybody. So I'm just going to go through it step by step. So this is what I would do. I fill up the jars with the olives. Now, I've got jars of 4 different sizes there. I don't know how much brine solution I'm going to make, but I just arrange them so all the same sizes are lined up next to each other or behind each other. That's my first step. Then what I do is I fill the jars with plain water. And if the jars were the same size, I'd only have to fill, you know, up each individual size once. That will give me an idea, once I empty that water, how much brine I'm going to need. So in that first jar on the left, once I'd emptied the water from there, there was 300 mils of water. In the second lot of jars, each took 180 mils of water. For the third lot, each took 200, and the fourth lot, the fourth one, just only took 125 mils of water. Add them all up together, and I need that much brine solution, roughly 1.2 litres or 1.185 litres. Now here we need to do the maths. So that's how much brine I need. Working it out, a 10% solution just means 10% of that 1185 becomes 118.5 grams of salt dissolved in that much water. That's if you're going to do it exactly. And that will fill up those jars, and then I would put the lemon juice over the top, the olive oil over the top, the baking paper, and then the lid. But that's just to give you an idea. If you've got a whole lot of jars filled with olives, it's just a little bit of simple maths. But I do work with people who are mathematically challenged, so I thought I'd just add that to that. Right, so that's two methods, both not difficult, but in order of difficulty, now I'm going to get into something where it adds a little bit more work for you at the start before they go into jars, but that will speed up the curing process. And this method is where the beer stubby comes in. We're going to split those olives open, but we can only do this for firm green olives. It can't be just old olives, any sort of ones that are already turning black, because it would squash them rather than split them. So with a firm whack, we're aiming to loosen it so that that bitterness can come out. Now that one hasn't quite opened, so give it another whack to open it up again. And you go through all of your olives that way. So for those who picked up olives, I gave you 2 bags that were greenish. One was green with a bit of purple. You can't use this method for that because it will squash the olives, because they're already starting to soften because they're already turning purple. But if they're straight green, you can do this. Now, once they're split, then what do you do with them? Well, I've got 3 different ways of treating split olives, and my family like them all. So this is usually the method I use. I just want to show you this. This was a group of women workshop at my place a few years ago. They said this was the best part of the whole thing, just getting those olives and just smashing them away. So you notice they're using just a small bottle with a little concave base so that the olives don't go skitting all over the place. So a beer stubby is ideal for that. Right, so this was one of the recipes, unfortunately not in the handout, but if you clicked on the link, you would have found this as well. Now this I dedicate to Mrs. Luca. Now Mrs. Luca is a Cypriot woman, and I got the recipe from her after I was at her place having dinner, and I tasted these delicious olives. And I said, oh, how long did these take to cure? She said, oh, 2 months, 3 months. No, not very long at all. And she in fact says, you know, about 6 to 8 weeks, they're ready. So of course I pressed her for the recipe or the technique, and I interpreted her values and sort of put numbers to them. But what she does is she splits the olives like we've just done there, but as soon as she's cracked them open, she puts them into a bowl of water just to stop the broken edge or the open edge going brown or oxidizing. So just keep cracking your olives and then put them in that bowl of water. Then she puts the olives into the jars, and she works out how much brine solution is needed. Now it's curing solution because it's not just brine. So for each litre of solution needed, she includes the juice of 1 lemon and 200 mils of white vinegar. And so that's added to her 10% brine solution. So here she's got the acidity of both lemon and vinegar in there, which helps to prevent that bacteria getting into the olives. Also gives them a delightful sort of lemony flavour as well. So she fills the jars of the olives with the solution. And then she also puts a slice of lemon over the top just to help to keep them submerged. And then she puts that olive oil over the top as we did before. I would put baking paper and then over the top, and then put a lid over the top of that again. And see, she suggests that after about 6 weeks, you can start to taste the olives. If they are bitter still, you will know it, but because they'll taste revolting. Just seal them, store once again. So it really, again, it depends on how big the olives were to start with. So if you're starting with the jumbo Kalamata, which are the ones that are available at the moment in shops if you're buying olives, I reckon they do take a little bit longer than 6 weeks. You might or might not know that if you were to purchase olives in stores, and good greengrocers will have them, as in uncured or off the tree, at different stages of the season, and the season is autumn, you can get different ones. So I like them right at the start of April, when they're the type of olive called a Spanish Queen. They're more round. And so I do prefer the flavour of those, because believe it or not, different olives have different flavours. It's not so much how they're cured, but you know, you probably wouldn't be surprised to know, say, for example, the Granny Smith tastes different to a Pink Lady apple. Like dirt, we know that. Olives are the same. Olives have different flavours. Yes, they're all olives, and yes, you can use different olives for different techniques, but you're going to get different flavours at the end. So just keep that in mind. If we were doing this face-to-face, I would have all these olives out in front of you for taste, and I'd give you different olives using the same method so you can really see, yes, olives do have different flavours. So anyway, in April's a Spanish Queen, and then we start to get into the Kalamata, and now we're into what we call a jumbo Kalamata, much larger olive. They're still green now. If you're waiting for black olives, you can get the black Spanish Queens now, but you'd be waiting till about June, July to get the black Kalamata, the jumbo Kalamata. So the season sort of progresses. They don't all come off the tree all at once. So let's go to now our split green olives. Imagine we've cracked them open. This is now this is Mrs. Luca's olives. She likes to dress them with lashings, lots of beautiful olive oil, crushed garlic, smashed coriander and so on, and possibly some lemon zest in there too. And they're delightful to eat. So anyway, method number 2. So you split the olives. This method here, we put the olives into a bowl with water, and we've got to change that water daily for 4 days. So you leave it in the bowl, take it out next day, put in some fresh water and so on for 4 days. Also put some lemon with that water. That helps to keep that water a little bit acidic, and it stops your olives going soft and mushy. If your olives are ever soft and mushy, they've gone off. We don't want that. So if you even open up a jar and you go to taste one and it doesn't have any bite to it, as in any firmness, then something's gone wrong in the processing of or the curing of your olives. You'll need to probably discard the whole jar. But I'll talk a bit about that at the end. So anyway, you've soaked the olives, changed the water for 4 days. You probably need to change the lemon a couple of times as well. And then it's bottled into a brine solution that has some vinegar added to it. So for every litre of brine that you need to put these in your jars, you add 50 mils of white vinegar. White vinegar is just your skipping girl type vinegar. You could use white wine vinegar probably as well, but it might give it a little bit of a different flavour. These do happen to be my family's second favourite type of olives to make. So I do make quite a lot of these. You can see the colour change from that bright green of the olive off the tree, and then after a few days you start to get some of that brown or that olive colour coming through, and then by the time they're completely cured, they've all gone to that olive green colour. So that's method number 2. So a little bit of work at the start by smashing them all and then changing water for 4 days. But you get your olives ready in about 4 months. This method here is my family's firm favourite method, and they're called Skiacharde. So for any Italians amongst you, you'll know that Skiacharde means smashed, I suppose, or squashed, really. These ones require a lot of work from you, but the work is only in getting them to the stage where we soak them and change the water every single day until all of the bitterness is gone. Now, when Ancilla said we're going to run this workshop, I said, look, I need notice. I need at least 2 to 3 weeks notice so I can get a bowl of these happening so that everyone can taste them at the end. And in fact, they're ready to eat as of today, but I started them 2.5 weeks ago. So that continually changing of the water every day does leach out all of that bitterness. So, but we need to also remove the pips, and by removing the pips, that helps to speed up the debittering process. It's easy sometimes it's hard to remove the pips straight away, but if you've left them soaking for 2 or 3 days and then remove the pips, it does make it easier. So once they're removed, notice they're still not cured. We've still got that bright green colour there. I continue to soak and change water. So notice now they're going a bit darker, except for, let's see if you can see, there's a really bright green patch there. If you were to taste into that, that would be revolting. And there's lots of bright green patches still. So they're still not ready. And that was 8 days after removing the pips, which is about 11 days since I started. By about 14 to 16 days, again, depending on the size of the olives, now they're ready. That is, if you were to taste them, you're not going to taste any bitterness. But the bitterness is part of the natural olive flavour. So if you taste them right now, they're almost a little bit bland. They're certainly not bitter. They've got a lovely firm texture to them, but they haven't got terribly much olive flavour. And in fact, they'll taste watery because they've been sitting in water for such a long time. So we've got to press that water out. And I inherited from mum and dad a plastic, perforated rectangular, what would you call it, basket, okay? And my dad had cut a piece of wood to fit that especially. So what I do is I empty the olives into this basket, I put the piece of wood over it, and I just cover the wood with a bit of plastic, and then I put a weight over it. Now I've got this old bluestone weight that my grandfather, I love the history that's involved in all of this, but my grandfather, he chipped away at it so it was nice and round, because when we put things into round bowls and need to press them out, we've got a ready-made bluestone heavy weight. But anyway, anything over the top, just to try and press out as much water, and generally leave it overnight, sitting over the sink or over a tray or something, just to catch that water. So you can see they're all nice and pressed now. All right, so still they're not going to have much flavour. All you've done is just taken the water out. The way our family adds a little bit of flavour back in is to sprinkle some vinegar over it. And here I'll use a nice white wine vinegar. So I'll put them into a bowl, loosen them all up a little bit, give them a good sprinkle with this white wine vinegar, depending on how much vinegar you like, up to, from 2 hours or, up to 24 hours or overnight. Then, is this ever going to end? Then I've got to squeeze out that excess vinegar. So it goes in the basket all over again. I squeeze out that vinegar. And this is what I was doing this morning. So at this point, they were ready to eat, basically. I do add a bit of salt at this point, just for flavour again. And my rough rule of thumb is I've got to have measured the olives, original kilo of olives to start with. And it's about 25 grams of salt for every kilo of olives. Toss it well. And so the salt will gradually dissolve. And then they are ready to eat. Now we tend to dress them first, and dressing means lots of lashings of beautiful olive oil, some crushed garlic, if you like chili, some chopped fresh chili, oregano, dried oregano is mandatory. You've got to put that in there according to our recipes anyway. And you can just eat them as they are. Now my son takes his lunch to work every day, and he'll just cram a bread roll full of these olives. They don't have pips in them, remember, you've taken them out earlier. And they're very, very moorish. They're really lovely, lovely flavour to them. But they're not for long-term keeping. So they'll keep for about a month in the fridge. So we've put in a whole lot of work at the start, smashing them all, removing the pips, changing the water, adding vinegar and all the rest of it. But you've got olives ready to eat in about 3 weeks, and then they'll keep for about a month after that. So it's a very special time of the year when we sort of get into these olives, and then after that, bad luck, got to wait till next year. But that's fine. So that's my green olives. Now, has anyone got any questions at this point about green olives, or would like to share perhaps what they've done in the past? You can unmute yourself, and I just don't know. I can't even tell if anyone's put anything in the chat. Does anyone want to add anything? Can the person who talked to me about using caustic soda, are you there? And if you are, You're going to talk to us? No, yes, no? All right, I'll keep going. Right, okay, that's our green olives. Now, black olives. And now this method here can be used with black or semi-coloured olives as well. And it's very similar to, it's the same curing solution as one of the recipes we've already gone through. So you could put your black olives straight into a brine solution if you wished and put it into jars and, wait for them to cure. Or you could put them in the brine vinegar solution that we saw earlier. So for every litre of brine, we just add 50 mils of white vinegar. They are really quite pleasant tasting. So I use this if I don't want to bother slitting the olives or doing anything else. And I just put them in jars, make up the brine solution, add a bit of white vinegar, and then pour olive oil over the top and put the lids on as usual. And they really are quite tasty. A little bit more involved is this style here. And if you picked up an olive pack from me, you've got some of these in there, but they're not ready to eat. I'll show you at what stage you're up to. So what I did about a week ago, I cut a slit in each olive. So this is using a paring knife, and you just cut a slit, put it, get another one and so on. Your hands will be very stained afterwards because the stuff that comes out of it, because it's all black at this point, you'll get very stained. I get very stained thumbs actually. So make a slit in each olive, place them all in a bowl and cover with water. And then every day change that water 6 times, so over 6 days. You'll notice every time you do that, the water is draining away a lot of that colour at the same time. And this is why your commercial olives put colour back into it. I mean, they don't turn out to be pale white or anything, but they're certainly not a dark black colour anymore. So you change the water every day for 6 days. The next day, after you've taken the water out, this time we replace the water with white vinegar, and just cheap white. The person who gave me this recipe, she said just the Aldi vinegar, just the cheap stuff. So I got this recipe from a girlfriend of mine who married into a Greek family. And even though the olives necessarily weren't Kalamata olives, as in the variety, they tasted like the commercial ones when you buy Kalamata olives from your deli. So I call it Kalamata style, but you can use any olives any black olives for this style. So you've left them in vinegar overnight. The next day you drain off that vinegar. So those of you who got packs yesterday or the day before, I'd asked you to put vinegar into your olives. Now you can drain that vinegar off. If you picked up packs from me this morning, you're already up at that stage. You've already been sitting in vinegar overnight. So we drain off that vinegar. We bottle those olives, put them back into jars and just fill it up with a 10% brine solution. We don't need to add lemon over the top unless you wanted to keep them submerged, because there is already acidity within these olives because of that vinegar. Add your oil over the top and then leave them to cure. And they really are very delicious. So that's the Kalamata style. When you go to use them, you can again dress them with olive oil, oregano, with whatever you like, garlic of course too. I just eat them straight. Is that a question I'm hearing? No? Yes?
Yeah, Maria, sorry, can I just, we picked our black olives last Sunday.
Yep.
And I've been changing the water with a bit of salt every single day since then, but I haven't slit them. Is it too late to slit them now?
Look, slitting just
speeds up the
process. Now, when you say say a little bit of salt?
Probably, it was quite a big bowl, maybe about a quarter of a cup of salt every day with the water.
Yeah. See, look, I'm sorry, I'm getting feedback. A lot of people do change water with salt. I don't for a couple of days. You lose a lot of salt down the drain, which isn't good for our water use, but I tend to leave the salting to once it's in a jar and just keep changing with water. Look, if you wanted to, but if you've got a really large bowl, yeah, you can if you wanted to, but at this point, if you've already been going for a week or so, I'd bottle them up. First of all, taste one. Taste one. See how bitter it is. It might be ready just to in a brine solution. It might not need to be still. But I don't change water. Or how cured they would be at this point.
All right, but is it okay to slip them now, even though it's 6 days?
Yeah.
Yep. Cool.
Taste one first.
Okay. All right. Cool. Thank you.
Hi, Maria and Maria. I just thought I'd, do you mind if I interject? I've got olives on my neighbour's tree, and they're very small. And my neighbour, who's an old Greek man, said to me, because they're so small, not to slit them because there's no need. Yeah. It takes too long because there's so many of them, and I've got a massive bucket now, and they're just same as you've been soaking for 2 weeks now. I've just been waiting, and he said that's what he does, and I've done that method 2 years in a row. It's always worked. So I think you'll be okay if you've been changing the water and you haven't slit them. Like Maria said, it will only speed up the process. You're not going to ruin them. And slitting them now, I don't know if it will make much difference. But I'm not the expert.
So after 2 weeks, are they ready to eat or not?
No, I tried them. It's not very big. What I would do now is I sometimes leave them longer, and I put them in a brine solution and I put them away for a couple of months.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So basically, it's just if you mute yourself again, basically the more work you're prepared to put in before they go into jars, and that's by changing water and so on, the faster your eventual curing will be. Yeah, and if they're tiny black olives, no, I wouldn't bother slitting them. I'd probably go back and use this method here. Just put them straight in jars. I wouldn't even bother changing water. Yeah, they will take a while to cure, but really depends on how many you've got to process and how quickly you want the olives. So what we're doing here at home, we're eating olives from 2 years ago. So I've got olives continually. I'll never run out of olives, honestly. Continually on the go. So I'm not waiting to eat this year's ones until next year or even the year after. But if you do want to speed up the process, you do need to do those changes of water quite a bit. Now, another method completely separate, and these are the dried black olives, which for me are an acquired taste. They're not my favourite. I don't hate them, but they're not my favourite simply because they're so intensely flavoured, and I think it's because of a whole lot of salt. So I'm just going to run through the method and then I'm going to show you a different one. So this is dried black. So you've got to weigh out your olives, and let me see what the quantity was. Dried black olives, 200 grams of salt for every kilo of olives that you've got. So weigh them first and then weigh out your salt. At this point, I would also slit them just to make it a little bit faster. So you probably want for this method to work really well, sort of juicy black olives, not tiny little ones. So coat them with that, with the salt, just straight salt. You're not making up a solution, just straight salt. And then after about 7 days, you'll notice they've gone from round to a little bit more shriveled, and that salt's starting to disappear. And after a few more days, in fact, this was after probably about 2 weeks, looking more shriveled again. You can see a whole lot of solution has started to form at the base. So basically that salt has started to take moisture out of the olives themselves, and it's created its own brine solution. And it's up to you just every day just to toss them around a little bit, maybe with a wooden spoon if you've got a huge amount of them. And I like to press them down as well, put a weight over the top of them. That is, I'll just get a plate with, you know, a weight on top of that, because the more you can press them, the more those juices will come out. And then when they're ready, give them a brief rinse, and you can only tell if they're ready by tasting one. That's the only way you can tell. Give them a brief rinse. Then we put them, if you have a dehydrating machine, that's ideal, but otherwise in a slow oven. That is like a 60-degree oven with the doors slightly open. Lay them out flat on a tray and just let them dry out quite a bit. And then the way we tend to eat them is to, if you've got an antipasto platter or something happening, I'd warm them up gently and then put your aromatics there, like dried chili, whatever else might be. So they tend to get served warm rather than straight cold like that. To store these, you can, if you've got a vacuum seal bags, you can vacuum seal portions at a time. Or what I tend to do is I'll coat them in olive oil, just coat them, and then I'll put them in Ziploc bags and put them in the freezer. They keep for ages and ages because you've dehydrated them and using salt and using your slightly warm oven, and then put them in the freezer, take them out and just let them come to room temperature or heat them up all over again. But they are a very intense flavour. So either an antipasto platter, or if you're ever making a casserole and, you know, a very robust, say, beef or lamb casserole, you can chuck some of these in as well, just to blend in with everything else. That's one method that I've outlined. Now, there's another one on the page before if you've got your notes, and it's called the Black Sweet Calabrian Style Under Olive Oil. That's so 3 or 4 different methods of getting your black olives. So if you want to dry them, you can get black olives done quite quickly compared to leaving them in brine over the while. But the beauty of brine solution is that it's not just a curing, it also preserves the olives as well. So your olives sitting in brine can last up to 2 years, particularly if they're larger olives to start with. If they're only tiny, small olives, possibly leave them only 1 year in a brine solution. So when are they ready? Well, on the left here, I've got olives that are freshly bottled and then olives that are ready. Can you notice the difference in colour? So from freshly picked to that classic olive green colour. And the only way to tell is to try them. You know, get a spoon in there, try one. If it's still incredibly bitter to you, then, you know, reseal them and let them cure longer. If you think, oh, it's still taking too long, if you want to speed it up again and you've gone to taste them and they're still bitter, I would empty out that original solution and try some fresh brine in there. Start up another 10% fresh brine solution, because it's almost as if there's an equilibrium between the bitterness of the olive and how much the brine solution can take out. So you might need to put in some fresh one to lure out the rest of that bitterness. Trouble with that though, you might end up with very salty olives when you go to try them. You think, oh God, I can't possibly eat them, they're too salty. But if that ever happens to you, you know, they're cured, but they're too salty to eat, empty sort of all the brine solution out of the cured olives and replace it with fresh water. You'll need to sit them in the fridge though, because remember the brine, which is a salt solution, that helps with the preserving. If you're adding just water to that solution, to that bottle now, you know, the preserving element's gone. So you'll need to store them in the fridge. But you'll find that that water now will take away some of the saltiness from the olives and just make them more palatable. So that's just a hint. If you've ended up with olives that are too salty for you to eat, you can just leave them soaking in water for a little while. Now, sometimes things go wrong and you can almost see it as soon as you open up the jar. If you have mold on the top of the lemon, something's gone wrong. So it's either that the olive oil covering wasn't covering your lemon and the contents thickly enough and mold managed to get in. If it's a very thin layer of white mold, very thin, that's usually okay. And sometimes if you've ever worked in a deli and you're dishing out olives out of big tins, you'll see this thin layer of white mold that sort of breaks apart very easily. It's almost like a salty mold. I don't know how to describe it, but if there's full on your lemon's all moldy, then don't even try it. They've gone off. So something's gone wrong in the fermentation process. Something else about the fermentation, if you've ever fermented any foods or even made sourdough or something, you'll know that there's carbon dioxide that's released as part of the fermentation process. And so what might happen to your olives, or sorry, when you go to open your jar of olives, you might notice fizzing taking place. So you've opened up the lid and all these little bubbles start to rise to the top. I once had it so strong that the fizzing sort of went right over and it didn't explode, but certainly I always open olives over the sink just in case that fizzing happens after I've opened up the lid. Don't worry, that is quite natural. Fermentation has taken place, which is what you wanted. But the first olives at the top are going to taste tingly, a little bit tingly. But don't worry, it's all quite natural. But to that end, you will find, particularly because we like to fill up our olive jars as high as possible to try and exclude as much oxygen as possible, if fizzing has started to happen to your olives when they're in the jar, which is natural, it's going to force, that air is going to force some of the liquid out of your jar. So when you go to store your jars in the pantry or cool, dry, dark places where we always store preserves, I recommend sitting them on a few thicknesses of paper towel, because there will be, that fermentation will force some of that liquid out of that jar. So those of you who picked up jars from me today or the other day, you'll notice I've put a label on the lid of the jar rather than on the side of the jar. On the lid of the jar, I'll always write down which method was I using, where did I get the olives from, and the date that they went into the jar. So typically, if I read one, I've got here Mrs. Luca, cracked from shops 2020 or 19th of the 4th, not 2020 in fact. So I'll always say either who gave me the olives or what the method was. And I think that's really important if you're using lots of different methods to cure olives, because at this stage you probably don't know which flavours you really like or which methods might suit, your lifestyle and so on. So documentation, and here's the scientist in me coming out, documentation is really important. Don't just chuck them in a jar and put them away. You won't know what year you made them or what method you were using. And so when you go to replicate your results, you won't be able to. But don't put the sticker on the side of the jar, because that oozing of that liquid coming out of the side is going to obliterate that sticker. Put it on the top. Okay, that's the end of what I was going to talk about. I'm just going to go through a few resources and then we'll start opening up to questions. Several years ago, I found this fantastic resource. You can just Google safe methods for home pickling olives and you come up with this link. It is a fantastic document. And they talk about which types of olives, as in which variety, Manzanillo, Kalamata, whatever they might be, best suit different methods, and they'll give you different methods as well. Problem is, coming from America, it's using pounds and ounces, which I always have to go back and convert, but very, very handy. And then, of course, is consulting your elders or anyone else around you that you know that does olives. Get their techniques, get their recipes from them. So, do it while they're still around, please. But you may be familiar also with these two books, Manja Manja and Preserving the Italian Way. And in Munja Munja, two Melbourne-based women went around and collected recipes from their mums, from their nonnas and so on, and put them together in this book. And I love the book. There's two different ones, part 1 and part 2. And I got one of my recipes, I've adapted one of the recipes from here, from their book, into my regular recipes that I use. Fantastic. And it's great, just makes great reading. If you've ever grown up Italian, you will relate to a lot of the stories that they've got in there. And they also talk about preserving, curing meats, preserving summer vegetables as well as general recipes. The one on the right, Preserving the Italian Way, Peter DeMeo, you might recognise the name DeMeo. Sandro DeMeo is the head of Vic Health at the moment. He often pops up on social media. He's the son of Dr. Pietro DeMeo. Now, Peter DeMeo came to the nursery once when I was working there and did an olive workshop, and I got a few hints and things from him. But in this Preserving the Italian Way, he put together this book, had many editions since then, where he went and just asked people all their different preserving methods. He went overseas, lots of junkets in Italy, collecting recipes. And so I got this recipe book, an older version of it, from my uncle, who gave it to my mum, and mum gave it to me just before she died. And it's got chapters on olives. So I went through and I trialled a lot of them. So a lot of the ones that I'm using today have come from this book. So really well worth the investment, either of those, but particularly one on the right if you're interested in preserving your meats, olives, fruits and so on. They're really, really good. So look at those. But most important thing when we're talking about olives, you need patience. They don't get cured overnight, unless I suppose you're using caustic soda. You're putting them in the jar, and this is the ultimate slow food here. It's not going to happen straight away. So patience is really needed. My Green Garden is the name of my business. When you went and clicked on links, it took you to my website. But all those videos and things that I've showed will be on the website there as well.